Alpha Defense is back yet again, but this time it's not the Alpha Man himself, but a member of his team. The video is really bad. Before we go into the jokes and other stuff, I want to give some constructive criticism. First, get a better microphone. Half of the things you say I couldn't even understand, not because of your accent, but because of your microphone. It is really bad. Next thing, which was my major problem with the video, you play the points I make for way too long. For several minutes, you have me talking about things and then you reply to them. Only put a couple of sentences you want to reply to, not an entire 5-minute segment. That is the main reason why your video came out so unnecessarily long, where everything could have been said in 10 minutes. Now, I'm not going to play the video to you guys, first of all, because there is no point. You probably wouldn't understand half of it. I had to rewatch it several times to understand the points being made. I will leave the link in the description, pinned comment, and even as a pop-up in the top right corner, so you can go and give it a try. Second reason, well, Alpha Defense has had history of striking my videos, so I won't give him, them, another chance. With that out of the way, let's get into it. First point being made in the video was about me making fun of Alpha for making a response after saying he was done. But I did the same thing. The problem is that I addressed that myself in the video. He only played the clips of my video where I said I won't make a response, but completely left out where I acknowledged that. And I just had to make it. It was so hilarious to me that after a year of radio silence, he came back. Second point was about me saying Arjun is not good enough, but 118 Mk1A were ordered, which is false. I said Arjun is not good enough to replace other Indian tanks, particularly the T-90S Bhishma, which is why there are logistic problems since they have to make separate ammo and parts specifically for Arjun. Next, he says that Alpha's video was not a response to me, but a deduction of Mk1A, which is something they like to bring up, how they never respond to me. The goddamn title had me in it. Half of the video was talking about the points that were made during our videos a year prior. Then he says how Alpha Defense is not obsessed with me. No, I'm obsessed with Arjun, and they play clips of me poking fun at Arjun in some of my later videos. Mostly just short clips of making fun of the ammo and other things. Now compare that to making a video about a person, me, and not only that, making an entire channel dedicated to making fun of me, a person. You're comparing 5-second jokes about Arjun to that? Please. And then the stupidest claim I have heard. They accuse me of organizing a raid on their Discord server. Yeah, Alpha, the truth is, the link to your server was posted by one of the members on my friend's server, not mine. I had nothing to do with it. I'm on that server, but I have urged people not to go, but who the fuck gives a shit what I have to say? And about me wanting to plant fake documents, since my friend was on the server, I asked him if he could edit a document to give MK2 APFSDS more penetration, since I was expecting you to make a response before the 1st of April, and I was planning to use that as an April Fool's prank. But you're acting as if I was hunting you down or something. Planting fake documents, fucking hell, that's just ridiculous. Then they accuse me of taking this personally later on. Hilarious, honestly. He then states how Cynical Historian was also my victim, and how I also conducted a raid on his server while using an old Reddit post, which I didn't even know existed until a year after my response to Cynical's video. The fact that I instructed people to go on his server was a lie made up by a person who I'm not going to name. To be honest, I don't even know the person's real name, but the few people who went there explained that I had nothing to do with it later, and I never did, just like with Alpha. I told people not to go there. But the Reddit post was probably made before the revelation. It boggles my mind how some people behave on this platform. Even though a creator would say that they are not attacking the person but the argument, some people would go out of their way to harass the person on the receiving end, just because another person made a video on them. Now, about Cabby's Bob, or the containerized ammunition. I admit I did not know about it first. I based my information on the image of one of the early models, which did not have it. But I still stand by what I said. There is a lot of room for human error. Crew is trained to close it, yet we saw a loader who is serving, not in training, leaving them open in that video. And Alpha said the concept is better than Blast Door, which is definitely not the case, and I would really like to hear the reasoning behind that statement. Then he goes on to say how I didn't know about their PCB or penetration cam blast ammunition, or how I did not mention it in my latest response, because I didn't know about it. Well, here is a screenshot from my friend's Discord where I poke fun at the name of the ammo from last year. I definitely knew about it, but the projectile is not in service. Also states the same for MK2 APF SDS, that I didn't know about it at all when I said I actually did in one of my videos. To that, I also have a screenshot from the same server where I say it's not in active service. It is from 2019, before Alpha made his first video on the topic. Then says I didn't care to look and shows my description where I say I don't care about sources. Which was a joke at Alpha's expense at the time. Then he states that MK2 can actually penetrate 575mm, not 500, and posts this source. Well, yes, it can penetrate 575 at point blank. The source doesn't include the distance for the penetration. And I like how he used different sources which mentioned 500mm, but completely disregarded the information provided in them. This is called confirmation bias. Next, he goes on to say that if I knew about it, I would have known it is in production since 2018, but just because it was in production doesn't mean it was in active service. Svinets 1 was reportedly produced in low numbers since 2005, but only entered service much later. American MA29A4 has also been reported to be in production since 2015, yet it entered service together with SEPV3 5 years later. T14 Armata is currently being produced but is not in service. Production does not mean active service. After that, he goes on to say how India is indeed developing a projectile with 800mm penetration for Arjun, and as evidence uses a document where development of new APF SDS is stated, but no penetration values are given. I will say what I said before, it is impossible for Arjun to achieve such levels of penetration with APF SDS projectiles, because the gun wouldn't be able to sustain such ammunition. You need a much better gun to be able to achieve that. Then he goes to compare Arjun with Pakistani and Chinese tanks. Well, then let's get into that. He first compares MK2 APF SDS to Chinese and Pakistani rounds, while using wrong values. He uses 575mm value for MK2, which is incorrect, and gives wrong estimates to Chinese projectiles. To be fair, in my first Chinese tank video I have made such mistakes myself, but that was a long time ago. He gives 650 to 700mm to 125-3, which is incorrect, at least according to several sources, which put it around 800mm to 2 km. This is more viable for 125-2M, but it is a bit of an overstatement. It's closer to 600 at 2 km, which is the value he gave to 125-2, which is inferior to 2M. He states that 125-2 is comparable to MK2, which could actually be the case, but he overestimated both of them. 125-3 and 2M are better projectiles. Then he uses my video on Al Khalid as proof that Arjun can penetrate Al Khalid, but my video is not correct. I state that Al Khalid has no ERA on the hull, while it actually does. The ERA is mounted in one go on a plate over the upper front plate. That is why there are no mounts on the hull for ERA, and they don't mount it during training and peacetime, but since it is mounted all at once, they can be prepared for battle in no time. So I'm sorry, but Arjun can't penetrate Al Khalid. He then also states that Pakistan uses mainly Al-Zarar, Type 59 and 69 tanks, Al Khalid, Type 85 and T-80UD, and says how T-80UD would be the only one to survive MK2 APF SDS. Which is not entirely true. Type 59s have been phased out of service and Type 69 is only used by what can be considered National Guard, which are tasked with fighting terrorists and only small amount in the army, if any at all. So Type 69s would have been used against India. For Al-Zarar, sadly we have no information on the armor protection. So I don't know where he got that idea. It does have composite armor, but we don't know the exact protection, so the statement that MK2 would be able to penetrate it has no basis. For Al Khalid we already concluded that it can't. Type 85 UG might not be so lucky. It uses old armor package with apparently no explosive active armor, so it most likely can't survive the MK2, and T-80UD or T-84 would certainly be able to stop it. Now, my biggest problem with this comparison is that he compares Arjun Mk1A to current Pakistani tanks, which is not fair because Arjun Mk1A is not fully adopted yet. It has just been ordered and Pakistan is currently procuring Chinese VT-4 tanks and are producing Al-Khalid 2. Those would cause even greater problems because it's even more tanks that Mk2 cannot penetrate. Now, that would mean that Type 85 UG is the only one that we know can be penetrated, and for Al-Zarar we have no information, so we can't come to any conclusions. And not to mention the fact that Arjun would be certainly outnumbered by all those tanks. If we want to compare the best to the best, especially at the time of the full adoption of Mk1A, then it wouldn't be able to penetrate the best Pakistani tanks, which would include Al-Khalid 1, N2 and VT4. Then he states how India is developing 125mm APF SDIs with 600 to 800mm of penetration for 125mm guns for their T-72s and T-90s. And oh my god, and he shows a document stating the depth of penetration of 530mm at 60 degrees. Dude, 530mm is the depth of penetration achieved on a 60-degree plate. That's the line of sight penetration. How did you come to the conclusion of 800mm is beyond me. And do you know what came out of that? Then he states how HESH is not obsolete, it was required by the army. Like, how is that a solid argument? Just because the army adopted it doesn't mean it is good. I'm done explaining why HESH is not as good as other projectiles. Go rewatch my older videos. PCB is really good, but it is not yet adopted. Also, here is what Ben Wallace, British Defense Secretary, said about new Challenger 3 switching the gun from rifled, which used HESH, to a smoothbore. It is going to be a smoothbore. It is going to use NATO standard of ammunition, which makes it definitely more flexible and versatile wherever we go. But what do I know? I'm just a War Thunder gamer. After that, he again says I didn't talk about PCB because I didn't know about it, and again I will show you the screenshot. I didn't talk about it because it is not in service. Then comes the armor behind the sight argument, and it seems to have been completely twisted from the original. Arjun has as much armor behind the sight as it has under it, to where the fact said there is no armor behind the sight, so I will prove there is. Like, how did we come to this? This is completely twisted from the original point. Alpha was claiming there is armor behind the sight pretty much in the same amount as on Leopard 2. Here is a throwback.
This is an image of an 3D art made for a game, a non-authentic source. Here is a more accurate image of Arjun and its schematic, and it can be easily seen in this image that the block behind the sight isn't as small as it's been presented by the critics. The block behind the sight is almost equivalent to the block right behind the cheek. Thus the commander of the tank is well protected, and this thing is not a hole in the armor.
And now they're doubling down on that and saying how it's around 400mm thick, using different sources including pixel measuring, which is completely wrong. He takes the femur of the tanker sitting on the top of the tank, finds average Indian male femur to be 41 cm long, and thus comes to the conclusion that the armor is that thick. This is done so poorly that the conclusion is completely wrong. You see, the position where the guy is sitting is not exactly behind the sight, nor is it exactly above the back armor. He just took a random position and decided, yep, this is the armor, while, as I said, the armor is not behind the position. But let's say for the sake of the argument that it is, which isn't. He says how it's composite, so it might have better equivalency than its thickness, which is never the case for APF SDS protection. There is no composite armor that offers better protection than its thickness, only less, because that is how composite armor works. The 400mm thick composite would stop RPG-7 rockets at best. Any modern ATGM or APF SDS will go through that like hot knife through butter. And I like how there is no mention of the missing ERA block on the right side of the turret, which, as I kept saying, makes the entire area weaker than the left turret cheek. And if you want to say how we don't know if the armor is good enough there, why did they mount the ERA on the left cheek if the armor was good enough? They did not mount it on the right side because it would cause issues for the gunner's sight, which is why tanks like T-72B3 didn't have it, and now that they received it, it is much smaller, thus less effective, because it must not cause any issues for the gunner. And let's for the 400mm value, say that the armor is thicker than Leopard 2's, and thus 400mm is possible. It still does not disprove my original point, that the armor, together with the sight, is as thick as the armor under the sight, and the point was that there is no attempt to extend the armor to meet the protection of the one below. Oh, and he also says that the tanks are usually hit at angles, and to that I will only say if the angle is high enough for the back armor to be effective, you wouldn't even be able to target the sight in the first place. Then he goes on to use a tweet of a guy to try to prove that the storage boxes are 50 to 70mm thick, and oh boy do I love it. Not only does the tweet not say that, but he also disproves the claim that Alpha was making, that those are composite armor blocks. I just love it. Let's read the tweet. From my collection, Arjun main battle tank has 50 to 70mm armor plating at sides and rear. Boxes are for storage and food. Which yeah, goes against my theory of water tank, but proves that it is indeed a storage box, not a composite armor. As for a 50 to 70mm thickness, the guy was obviously referring to the side and rear armor thicknesses. You can't possibly measure the thickness of the storage container unless you have special devices. Unless there is the same container at the rear of the turret that is invisible or something. Ridiculous, honestly. As the guy states, such thickness is just enough to stop some autocannon fire. Even if he was referring to the storage boxes, that is not enough to stop RPGs. So yes, thank you for proving my own argument of Arjun having less coverage than its western counterparts. Then he goes to say how I said Hesh was adopted because it was cheap, and I say how rifled guns have shorter lifespan and thus need to be changed more often. Well, for your information, Arjun is an expensive tank. It is not a cheap one. The rifled gun was the worst possible idea, but I'm not going to explain again why. Hesh is cheap, it was done to save money, but that was the reason for it. It's a leftover from Arjun Mk1 and hasn't been changed. Now, with the development of PCB, it's looking to be replaced, but who knows when will that happen. For now, Mk1 and Mk2 APF SDS and Hesh are not good for modern standards. 80s style of ammunition loadout, literally. And if Hesh was good, why are they looking to replace it with PCB? Then he goes on to say that they never had me in mind when making the videos and that I took it personally, etc. As I said in my previous videos, I never meant that the video was a direct response to me only, but my original video was definitely a part of it, since the images I created myself were used to bring up the points. Which can only mean one thing: you watched my original video and you wanted to try to refute the claims that were made. It might not have been the only thing you were responding to, but definitely was a part of it. You can only lie. This is probably the worst response so far. The quality of the video and the arguments made are pretty bad. To be fair, some jokes did make me laugh, but that's about it. So yeah, that would be all. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. Have a nice day.